Contracts officers to me are a lot like umpires in a baseball game. They get a lot of crap for not doing their job, and when they do their job, they just kind of don't get noticed. Welcome to It's Fine, the podcast that navigates the intersection of technology, national security, and general nerdery. I'm your host, Matt Triner, and this week's episode, we're diving into a topic critical for modern military operations, secure mobile applications. As technology continues to evolve, so do demands for secure and reliable mobile applications within the military context. From field operations to communications and logistics, these apps play a pivotal role in enhancing efficiency and effectiveness on the battlefield. However, ensuring security of these applications presents a myriad of challenges, particularly when it comes to meeting the rigorous standards of NIAP certification. NIAP certification, governed by the National Information Assurance Partnership, sets the bar for security standards in mobile applications encompassing both unclassified and classified environments. These requirements for fielding secure apps in these contexts are stringent, necessitating robust encryption, authentication mechanisms, and comprehensive vulnerability assessments. Joining us today is Harold Smith, the co-founder of Monkton, a premier provider of secure mobile apps and the owner of the MATTER IDIQ. With his extensive expertise and experience in the realm of secure mobile applications, Harold will shed light on the complexities of NIAP certifications and the challenges associated with fielding secure apps for mobile use. Together, we'll explore the intricacies of developing, certifying, and deploying secure mobile applications in military environments, uncovering best practices, innovative solutions, and actionable insights for stakeholders in defense and technology sectors alike. So whether you're involved in military operations, cybersecurity, or mobile app development, join us as we dive into why it's fine to prioritize security in the realm of mobile applications for military use. Harold, welcome. Thanks for coming with us this afternoon.
Hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
So just to kick off, if you want to tell us a little bit about Monkton and how you guys came to the use cases of solving these secure mobile apps.
Yeah, so we've been in the mobility field for a while now. Myself and my partners, we have been doing this since, late 2009, sort of when the iPhone came out, when the iPad was introduced, building mobile applications, trying to get the government to get on the train of, hey, mobile applications can really help you solve your data problems of capturing data where people are actually doing their work. There's nothing worse than paper-based processes or processes that are really antiquated that don't get information to where people do their job. Since 2009, we founded Monkton in 2016. We started with this concept of, can we build an SDK software developer kit that would enable anybody to build mobile applications that could run in classified environments, satisfying the NIAP criteria. We did that. We built 2 mobile applications. We took one through the assessment with the NSA, and we're a common criteria validated component for data at rest and data in transit, as well as being a mobile application. We were the first company that bootstrapped that went through that process. So, it's a strange way to spend money, but it really proved our claims that, hey, you can build applications that can, turnkey can run in these kind of environments. And our gamut there was, will this flow down to controlled and classified information, impact level 4 and below? Sadly, we really didn't see that come out that way, but where we have gone is, we started leveraging our software to build applications for the government. So we built, our first line of effort was we built an application for the Air Force called Bryce, which enabled aircraft maintainers to do their maintenance on the flight line using iPads. This application, it was a fully native iPad application. It leveraged AWS Web Services as sort of a middleware to connect to a DISA deck that was an old COBOL database called IMDS that aircraft maintainers would typically use during their day. We actually didn't take that through the full NIAP process, but we took it to a lab, Acumen, that actually evaluated it like it would go through the entire process with the NSA. And that was a big help for us at really pushing, hey, NIAP is important. These standards are important. And as we collectively seen over the last few years, DevSecOps, the SSDF from CISA, like these concepts are becoming more prevalent in, hey, we need to build better software. That project ran for 2.5 years. It was a phenomenal success. Users loved it. There's some drama in how it ended, and the Air Force, which I'll touch on later, the Air Force thought they could do it better. Didn't pan out that way. The sad thing there is airmen lost that capability that was helping them do their job day to day. We all lose, you've been in this game long enough to know you're going to lose. But it's hard to lose and then see your users be really impacted. Since then, we've done a lot of work with like Air Force Special Operations Command. They actually awarded us our phase 1 SIBR that eventually turned into the Phase 3 SIBR that we have through Space Force. That Space Force contract was started April 1st, 2020. A strange day, but it was well into the pandemic, and we were working with NORAD Northcom, and we really had to go from, hey, here's an idea, to here's something in production. And because of the work we had done previously with our SDK, with cloud development we've done, we were able to get in an interim authority to operate within a week and a full authority to operate within 4 weeks. That actually DISA went and audited. And then we were delivering our first mobile applications to do tracking of medical supplies, PPE equipment, beds open for the Mercy, Comfort, and field hospitals that Northcom are setting up. And, just a lot of that was the ability to partner with the right people, bring stuff we have done in, and then just run faster. So since then, we've been, again, spending a lot more time getting into building secure mobile apps, building the cloud stuff, and, how does that all fit together?
So a couple things just to touch on that you said there. First off, first company that was bootstrapped to go through the NIAP process. I think that's pretty great. Then it sounds like you voluntarily went through the NIAP process a second time, not fully decertified, but you went through all the controls and all the evaluation. I would say it's probably even more rare than a bootstrap company going through NIAP to begin with, to kind of volunteer yourself to that level of scrutiny, really because you wanted to do a better job, right? You wanted to do better and have security and have, I'm assuming you wanted to have some evidence that, everyone's going to say that they're very secure. Few people are going to volunteer to back it up. And so I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, and interject there, we've all heard the A2 process is horrible and takes forever. It's like, okay, what can we do to help accelerate this process and get our customer to where they need to be faster? And we felt the NSA had this process of, at least on the mobile side, here's how we can accelerate that adoption of this technology and get it where it needs to be with this evidence that you would present to the NSA for classified use cases. So that was sort of our calculus there.
Interesting. And would you say, and this is always like NSA's relationship with NIAP has never been fully clear to me. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit, because I know that they're certainly the evaluator of commercial solutions for classified. So you have that nexus there to some degree, but are they like the real NIAP certifying entity for all of these types of solutions? Are they just one path of many? How would you describe that for people that are unindoctrinated like me?
No worries. So I might get some of the acronyms wrong, so I'll try to use the full word. So the way it works is, if for people who are familiar with FedRAMP, it's a little different than FedRAMP. So I'll just give you the FedRAMP vignette real quick. So if you want to go through FedRAMP, you have to be ready to go through FedRAMP, but that's not FedRAMP ready. That's something different. Your product has to be ready to go through the assessment process. You need to go find a customer that's willing to sponsor you through that. And you keep your fingers crossed the whole time that that customer doesn't vanish for some reason and you've lost all your investment into that. NIAP works differently in the fact that you could build a product, take it to one of the NIAP assessment labs. I think there's about a dozen. They've gone through the process. It's a lot like FIPS. They get certified, they can do testing, and then they present their evidence to the NSA. And how that works is you have to build a security target, which anybody in the security world understands. You fill out and say, hey, here's the cryptographic algorithms I'm using. Here are how I'm doing hashing. Here's how I'm handling passwords. Build all that into a document. Your lab validates your claims against test data they get back. And then they present that to the NSA and a security target. And there's one other term I'm forgetting. It's been a few years since I've gone through it. With that, the NSA has hired some FFRDCs like MITRE. I forget some of the other ones we've worked with that test the data that you presented, make sure that it seems valid, make sure the security target is right. And if all that checks off, you are compliant with NIAP. They call it products and compliant. You normally say certified, but they use the product compliant list. Once you've done that, you're eligible to be on the common criteria list as well. And additionally, if you've checked off a few boxes, you can also be commercial solutions or classified components, just depending on which security targets you've checked off. And with that, you can be just a turnkey component in some classified solutions. So that's sort of the background of it, if that follows.
Yeah, that's interesting, because certainly we do a lot of advisory work on the FedRAMP side, so we're very familiar with that process. I didn't realize that NIAP didn't require sponsorship in the same
Voluntary.
way. That's I mean, obviously the market forces make sense as to why you would volunteer for it, but I'd imagine that creates a slightly different funding model, right? Where you guys are paying for it yourself, and also the funding. It seems like, unlike a cloud service, this is a thing that you can ship in a box, right? whereas a cloud service is a living, breathing thing. And I always joke that FedRAMP is eventually going to die by 1,000 paper cuts called Kanban, just because they've just taken on so many things. They have a major gap there in maintaining those accreditations that they have given. Whereas it feels like NIAP's a little different than that in a way that's positive for the program and for people like you guys.
Where we try to go with it, we worked with Acumen and came up with an automated testing methodology to test the application. So that alone saved us a tremendous amount of time. One really interesting thing about NIAP is the day you start, you have 180 days to finish. So if you're not finished on that, you go to the back of the queue and have to restart everything. So it really forces you to be on your game and make sure that you're hitting your targets and getting everything out the door where you need it to be.
That's another interesting differentiator. And I just say that because I don't know if the JAB can find their car keys in less than 180 days, right? They got a lot of keys in the bowl, right? It's a lot to look through. So switching just to some more less process and more kind of security risk questions, what would you say are some, obviously there's a lot, but what are some security risks that you would highlight when it comes to mobile applications in a military context, be that NIAP tested or just other things through the authorization process that you've come across?
Yeah, so I guess to set the stage, there was a memo, I think it came out in 2018 or 2019 from the DoD CIO office, mandating NIAP compliance for any application at impact level 4, so CUI and down. The only true requirement for NIAP is when you start to get into IL5 or national security systems in secret. So you can get by building CUI applications that don't need to go through that process, some NSS, and, obviously, if there's a program classified that wants it bad enough, like that you don't have to go through the formal process, they would have their own internal assessment. So I wouldn't say NIAP is mandatory, but it's going to help you get to where you need to be. And I guess I'd say there, within the government, I've only seen a very limited set of capabilities on true mobile. So like true mobile apps, you see things like ForeFlight that are commercial applications. Hypori has won a lot of praise lately just because of the way they can display on glass, from a data center. They're getting some big footprint in the Army just because they can access their email, that kind of stuff. True government built solutions, I've seen, to be honest, I haven't seen that many. There's TAC comes to mind, the Tactical Assault Kit. I think they've renamed it, but you see ITAC, ATAC, and there's WebTAC maybe. But a lot of those are built by contractors. The NJA has their version of ForeFlight, but it's just not maintained to what ForeFlight is. So you sort of get this contentious, the government's trying to build things, but they just don't have the expertise, in my opinion, to build out these UI-focused applications that can check off the security boxes. Like, it's just, as you all know, building software, it's not easy. And it's not easy to build secure solutions up and down.
It's true. And you're also limited by GS pay scales, right? Which are different than that of what we pay people that can do that work. And it's also difficult the government doesn't make it easy with even try doing that development on a standard issue Nipper laptop. Right? I mean, try doing that development inside of a SCIF without internet access, right? I mean, those are the types of constraints that, in addition to the difficulty of talent and this general shortage there, even within industry, I'd say that there are good app developers and there are okay app developers and there's certainly bad app developers. But that all those additional constraints that are inherent to a GS type development is got to be really challenging.
When you get into, other issues like authentication, there's, Purebred has been around for a while, but it's still not, like, if you're not set up to handle certificate-based authentication, you're up the creek already. With this AAL2, AAL3 credentials, which are, it's either CACPIV or some other hardware type of authenticator, we've seen SAML2 becoming an option. So, a lot of organizations aren't adopting solutions like Okta yet, but if you're trying to get ahead of the game, adopting SAML2 or OIDC authentication is really going to help companies building applications internally or ForeFlight, those kind of organizations, to be able to authenticate trusted user paths and all that stuff.
And I'd say that even gets more complicated the more you start looking at outside of, defense and partnerships and coalition and all of those other types of authentication constraints that can end up inside of a fielded military app like that.
Yeah, it's starting to get harder. If you I look at NIAP as a baseline of what you should be doing. Every company should be looking at those because they're not insane requirements. They're things that, the right kind of encryption. If you're hashing passwords, are you using enough iterations? Are you using the right hashing algorithms? It's just good guidance to follow. And I think people might sleep on those requirements because they don't realize them, but they are the base point. And as we see things like the SSDF coming out from CISA, mandating more control, mandating more processes, if you're not starting to get behind the ball already, I think you're going to be really far behind really shortly here.
Yeah, absolutely. SSDF is great because it didn't attempt to be another framework. It took things like 853, CSF. It took all the things that, to your point, you should have been doing anyway. And it kind of made them about app dev and not about securing an enclave or an environment, which is how all of those are framed by themselves typically, right? They're really infrastructure focused. I was really interested to see what they were going to do. I was really afraid it was going to be yet another publication with a whole new set of controls that all derive from the same control baselines anyway. But they didn't do that, right? It was a really strong mapping. They did a really good abstraction on top to kind of help an organization organize around it, which I think was really helpful. I'm curious, obviously, if you're NIAP certified and you've been through this, you probably have opinions. Do you think that the SSDF is something that is going to be adopted more broadly in each? I mean, you have the OMB memo for self-certification, which is kind of reminiscent of early days of 800-171 self-certification, right? So like,
you know how that's going.
yeah, well, I was going to say, I think we're still on the self-cert, right? Depends on what month this people are reading or listening to this episode as to whether or not we've moved to third parties yet.
It's May 2024, if you're wondering.
Yeah, I know, right? But I'm curious, like, do you think that that's where commercial applications are going to go to, like, third-party assessments against the SSDF? I mean, obviously, we're very much theorizing here. I'm just curious what your take is.
So my personal take is I think software development as a whole, as an industry, like this is, excluding Department of Defense, like it's including everybody. I still think we're in that magical elixir phase that medicine was in the late 1900s, where nobody really was sure what was going on, but some things seemed to work. That's Harold's personal theory on software development at the moment. But I think with that, I think you're going to see a lot of exclusions of the SSDF. Like there's going to be software that the government wants; they're going to get a hold of no matter what. I think you're going to see a lot of pushback of people either just going to ignore it or, there'll be waivers issued. Yeah, I think it is any organization that's looking to build software either internally for the government as a contractor or as building something that they want to sell to the government as a product. You should be really looking at these things now because, and I'm using the term worse, in this context of it's only going to get worse for you if you aren't jumping on the ball now. And I don't think that's necessarily you're not going to win work or whatever, but it's just going to be a lot to catch up on, and your competition is going to be leveraging these standards and running circles around you.
I really like the comparison on medicine because I've read some really, so first off, let's not poo-poo too much on the medicine in the 1920s. Some amazing discoveries were made then. But for every amazing discovery, there was a quack that was like, not enough leeches. That's the problem, right? And so that does really describe a lot of software today, right? When you find out, and everyone likes to pick on SolarWinds, and it's safe to do, but when you find out that their password was SolarWinds123, my mom, who's not a software developer, she first started on computers, it was, hey, did you turn off the monitor or the computer, right? She's much more adept now, but like, even she would realize that's a crappy password for an organization. And that feels like the medical equivalent of like, we need, you just didn't use enough leeches to bleed them enough. That's why they were still sick kind of thing. So it's a good parallel. I'm going to use that.
I really wonder, like, we've seen Microsoft get hacked how many times in the last year or exploited in some way, and still existing advanced persistent threats. And I'd love to know, is this legacy technology that they drug in the cloud and hoping is working? Like, is this stuff they rebuilt from scratch? Like, I personally think a lot of the issues the government is going to have in the next few years is all these lift and shift migrations are going to expose a lot of vulnerabilities that are out there that have been hidden because they're somewhere else. We really need to start thinking about how do we rebuild these legacy systems like COBOL or Cold Fusion that serve their purpose, but we're not going to win the next great power competition with software that was developed to fight the Cold War. And that's just reality.
It's an interesting parallel, and I'll say I totally agree with you, but it is interesting that when a lot of the decision makers don't understand the nuance of what is the technical ability of our adversary. And we are absolutely trouncing adversaries with air dominance platforms built in the 70s. So it's like, and I'm not comparing them. It's a bad comparison, but I do understand. I empathize with the senior leader that's like, I don't know, man, the F-15's working pretty great against most adversaries. and it's pretty old. So like, do I really need to fix this COBOL? And like, yeah, you do. It's not the same, but I can understand a little bit of that calculus on the other side of like, we'll get to it eventually, and new dominance platforms cost billions to trillions of dollars. I'm speaking about actual aircraft, but that's the level of investment that's probably needed to change some of these systems, right? When I look at personnel investigation and the mainframe that everybody on certainly in this conversation has gotten a letter from OPM that says, sorry, we leaked all of your credentials. That's an old COBOL CICS mainframe that is still there, right? They haven't quite gotten rid of it yet. Again, it's 2024 for anyone listening. Hopefully by the time you hear this, we will have gotten a little better. So I guess just pivoting to Monkton and your approach that's different, what approach do you take when looking at secure mobile applications? I've heard, secure by design, certainly some other kind of key concepts, but what are some key features that ensure reliability and safety, and really hitting on the ones that would really suck to put in later, right? Like this is an upfront investment. What are some ways that you guys try to do that in the apps that you put out for government use?
Good on Sista finally coming around on Secure by Design. I think I can probably go find LinkedIn posts from like 2016 talking about that with Wendy Fairfield. Shout out. I think you brought that concept to us of why not build things the right way from the very beginning. Again, not to pick on Microsoft too much, but the CEO just announcing 2 weeks ago that they're going to focus on security first. It's like, what? That should have been a while ago.
I think there was a great video that had Bill Gates talking about that in like the late 80s, and they put them side by side. It's like, oh wait, we've already made that promise. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's all right. I think for us, it is really looking at the full end-to-end picture, and that relies on cloud integrations. How does data work offline? How do you work partially disconnected? We see a lot of focus on let's build mobile apps, but do you really understand how things work with them? If we look at any mobile app you have on your phone, there's 99.9% chance it's sending data to a cloud somewhere. What cloud is that? Where is it going? Is it sending data to advertisers? Or is it sending data to Facebook, which, could be one and the same? Or is it some analytics platform that you don't know where it exists? Or is it somewhere overseas? There are so many issues compounded in just that when you start looking at, let's use this commercial capability in the government. Okay, well, where's that data going? A few years ago, the NGA had an app store project where you could bring commercial capabilities in, but I never really heard what do you do about the cloud backend. Like it was, quick to turn around for the mobile, but what are you doing for FedRAMP to assure that that data that you're collecting on that government issued device isn't going to some region in Amazon in the Middle East where who knows who owns it? For us, it is architecture. Architecture underlines everything we do. The only ability to move fast is if you invest in designing things upright and dragging that through and reinvesting in that architecture as new methodologies come out. We solely build native mobile applications. We don't muck around with anything like Facebook React or any of the other technologies where you can write once, run anywhere. We haven't really seen the greatest user experiences from those. So focusing on how do we bring the best experience to that end user so they can do their job efficiently and be happy at the end of the day. From our experience and our work, you have to go native. We also extend that to the cloud. So things we are building in the cloud are 100% functions and platform as a service. So we don't stand up servers. We don't manage Kubernetes or any of that other stuff when we're in the cloud. We build solutions that can run using Amazon Lambda, DynamoDB, and other services that are just purely infrastructure as code. And a lot of our investment has been, how do we go multi-region and hot swap availability? So if one region goes down, everything shifts over to the other region without anybody having to do anything. Again, that's just spending time learning. It's been a lot of investment, R&D, as you all can appreciate, to get there. How are you doing CI/CD? We're using all Amazon services now for their code suite for CI/CD work. We're building our own CI/CD solution that can leverage those, give the SA&A folks all the data they need for, software bill of materials, compliance within the cloud, the environments you're using. We're generating OSCAL reports, all these things to accelerate adoption, the ATO process, and building these applications are really, I think, the building blocks of what you need to come to the table with in 2024 if you want to have a differentiating story against the large primes that can play the game completely different than we can. On that, testing up and down is a hard requirement. So we do fuzzing, UI testing, unit integration testing. It's all automated. We're leveraging SonarQube, Device Farm, now Secures Lab Automated for testing the mobile applications, and even getting into the application user side. We had a patent awarded 2 to 3 years ago for hardware-based zero trust. So typically, after you authenticate and you're interacting with a web service, you would use a bearer token or some other secret you might have on that device. Well, with what we've done is we leverage that TPM on the device. It's a secure enclave processor on iOS or trusted execution environment on Android to generate public and private keys inside that immutable device where they can't be extracted to identify that device. So every time that user interacts with the web server, we know exactly what device on earth that is making that request, and we can perform that strong authentication without having to do extra work.
So I just to kind of highlight a few points, I really like when you refer to lambdas and cloud native services, I hear that as attack surface reduction and a lot of shifting of responsibility to frankly inherited cloud service offerings. That's in my opinion what ended up being lift and shift migrations probably should have been, because lift and shift in my opinion is kind of the worst of both worlds. You're now paying for a cloud bill that is by every metric more expensive than your on-prem bill was, and you're not getting the inheritance and other pieces that are the value add. They're why you pay more or why you should be paying more. I really like the way that you stated that. And I also think it's kind of this like mix of all of these things are hard, but also none of this is magic, right? Like none of the things you're claiming here are like so proprietary or different or unique that they're not, to your point, like bigs can play a different game. Bigs can do and say some things, and you're not suggesting that. You're saying we have these inheritable cloud service offerings and we should use them. You mentioned the flight line mechanic components that went back to a COBOL system, but like as opposed to following the typical Air Force playbook of Kubernetes for all API endpoints, which is like I don't want to be the guy to shit on Kubernetes here. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it sometimes isn't needed for what you're doing, right? And it sounds like in your case, it wasn't. I'm curious if there are any patterns or things that emerged from the type of implementation that you've done that would be worth mentioning as kind of a highlight of like, when are there too many lambdas? When are you lose control of that? Like when does it, or does it? Is it just, no, you just need to have the right governance and management and infinite's the right, you can have infinite Kubernetes, right? Why not infinite lambdas? It's a totally reasonable assertion. I'm curious what your experience was.
I'll touch on that, but I'd also like to say one of the real benefits of the functions platform as a service kind of route is for us, it's really lowered the costs for our customers. Like, if you have an application that isn't serving, tens of millions of people a day, it's just your standard enterprise application, maybe 10,000 people will hit a day. There's no reason, in my opinion, obviously, you shouldn't be using something like Lambda because you pay for what you use. You're going to cut your costs. Like we've seen our customers cut their costs 80% just switching to Lambda and execution costs. And I think the biggest saver there is the ATO costs. Like, we're all well aware of an IL5 ATO isn't easy or cheap, but leveraging those services that have already gone through accreditation process where we're just documenting how we're hitting those compliance requirements that fall into our hands for IL5. It's not hard. Like once you start doing it, and then after you do the first one, you have all that documentation you've done and you can just drag it to the next one. So we see a lot of, hey, we can just reuse what we've already done because, we're checking off these boxes. It's doing the right thing. We can just apply that over here. I say as far as patterns, so we're a big .NET shop for server side for APIs. So the great part about .NET with this is you can build what are called monolithic Lambda functions, which are, it's just you're deploying your web application or APIs to Lambda instead of a server. So we have one Lambda function that incorporates an entire enterprise application, and it works phenomenal. You can get into too many. I think there's 1,000 limit Lambda function as a default within Lambda, but that's obviously changeable. The hardest things are getting API gateway working right, that first time tied to your Lambda function, setting security permissions, all those little minor things. But once you build out your infrastructure's code templates, it's, as you probably know, you pretty much copy and paste from one to one and, check off all those boxes. So you really get into that reusable infrastructure component of what I think infrastructure as code really promises. So we've stayed away from Terraform, that kind of thing. Like if we're building for AWS, we build CloudFormation templates for AWS. If we're building GCP, we build their version. If we're doing Azure, we build their version. So you might save some time with Terraform, but our real take is do it in the language that your service provider provides you to get the best capabilities out of it and hit each of those cloud providers as you need.
It was funny. I was going to give you the boxers or brief moments between SDK and Terraform, but you took it from me in the first answer. It's a fair one. It's a fair. There's no right answer there, but it's definitely a fair take.
And honestly, for us, it's easier to find answers when if you have a problem, it's easier to go to Amazon and be like, "Hey, there's this problem with CloudFormation versus Terraform hasn't done something correctly." Like, I guess do you go to IBM now, or do I go to Amazon? Like, who's the person I go to chat with if I have an issue?
We've solved some interesting, especially when you get to IL6 Terraform issues that we've done. And then it's kind of like you've got Microsoft, you've got the artist formerly known as HashiCorp, you've got, our people on the line, you have our big prime on the line. And yeah, it does create some confusion. I'm a big fan of Terraform personally, but it's not without its costs, right? It's not without its costs. And I don't mean license costs because I've never fully understood the licensing model of Terraform. I don't think anybody truly does, but it's the capital of time got to inherently play catch up with the CSP. That's just the nature of the design of a third party anything. And it's not that the internal tools aren't going to have to play some catch up, because of course it's not one big Amazon team, but you have coordination of product managers and release roadmap and like good product rigor, at least on the Amazon side. No comment on Microsoft and GCP for that matter, but again, no comment on Microsoft. That roadmap usually stays pretty well in line. And to your point, when you call them out on a miss, it's usually like a high priority. That was a mistake. It wasn't we're behind it, and that's just the nature of dealing with me. So again, I happen to like Terraform a lot. I'm going to bookend it with that, but I do that. Those are all very valid reasons why using the native things are just a lot, especially when you're dealing with the newer services and the more rapidly changing services. Those make a big difference.
Although I will say, I wish Amazon, if you do enough with the APIs, like starting to dig into them, there's a lot of different naming conventions out there for different services. And it'd be great if there was an effort to consolidate. If they're using enumerations with a dash in one service, it could be camel case in another. So, sometimes there's not that sticking to convention that we collectively.
I said there was coordination among product managers, not standardization among product managers. Yeah, the guy that names things at Amazon, I'm convinced is like an LLM that is like very much hallucinating, but like an LLM that they gave a bunch of LSD to, whatever the digital equivalent is. So just stepping away from the technical depths of it, we talked a little bit about Matter, your phase 3 SBIR. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is, the scope of it, and kind of how that can let customers get to Monkton a little bit more streamlined?
So Matter, it's a phase 3 CIBR IDIQ. So it's a little different than your typical phase 3, but that's the path we went with Space Force when they awarded it. For those that don't know, there are 3 phases of CIBR, 1, 2, and 3. We jumped from 1 to 3, which was nice. I mean, you don't have to. You can do a phase 2, but if there's a need to get to 3, they can drag it that far forward. Yeah, it's been great. I actually got to see General Raymond, who's the previous 4-star who ran Space Force. I saw him this week and was able to shake his hand and say, thank you for creating the best set of acquisition experts out there, because we have been blown away by Space Force's ability to execute, help, and educate. And that's really been, to be honest, one of our big challenges with the CIBR is, as you all probably run into, a lot of contracting officers don't know what they are, and it can get confusing at times if there's not that education out there. It's allowed us to move really fast. We've been able to go from the first project with Northcom, we're able to go within a month and start delivering capability. Our typical engagements are getting something production ready within 6 months is what we shoot for from project kickoff to getting there. It's really agile acquisition for edge-based use cases. So that really checks off a lot of boxes within the DoD of, hey, I'm deployed. I need to be able to get data to and from a device. I need to be able to provide warfighters with this information. We were lucky about 2 years ago, it went federal government wide. We've been doing a lot of work in the places in Department of Homeland Security and other organizations that are, helping protect the homeland. So it's been fantastic. We can partner with anybody, like we can partner with you guys on something and really bring solutions to bear. For us, the true requirements are, one, is it going to help with edge computing and getting data to and from the edge is really the base requirement. And do our customers have money, which is typically a good indicator of being able to do something. So with that, we can help collaborate with that end customer and get a PWS put together and hopefully collectively be out solving that customer's need within a month. So it's been fantastic from that point. Once it clicks with a KO shop, we move really fast.
So on the topic of clicking with the KO shop, and I just say this, and so we don't have an SBIR today, although we're looking at some interesting early phase stuff right now. We're a hub zone company, and people don't even know what that is. There's only 4 set-asides, and 25% of the people seem to be ignorant about. And they know what it is, and I tell them, you can sole source to a hub zone. They're like, no, you can't. And I'm like, it's the next line of the FAR after the 8A one that you press all the time. And so, and again, like, it's not some arcane, different, like, deeper in the FAR thing. I think it's the next sub-bullet. It might be the next section, but it's like very, very, it's like if you read the whole page, you would know. And I'm just curious, and that's my frustration, that not to let that leak too much into this call, but I'm curious as to how you've been able to overcome what I'm sure is people saying outlandish things like, there's no such thing as a phase 3 SIBR, or I can't possibly order off of that, or how do I get 3 bids on your IDIQ? Like, I'm sure you've heard all range of craziness there. How have you been able to overcome that with contracting folks?
I mean, I think the favorites one is, this all seems illegal. And it's like, no, it's very much written into law. Like...
It's created by law for you, the acquisition person who was supposed to have read it. But anyway.
It's probably, you can agree, it's frustrating when you're supposed to have the FAR memorized, the government's supposed to have the FAR memorized, and clearly there's an understanding of the FAR. So that hurts. And as you know, if you're pointing to it and be like, hey, look, here's the line, they're not going to listen to some random contractor. Like, I wouldn't trust contractors either. So, there's that. But honestly, if we get too much of headwinds, it's just, we look at another opportunity. Like, it just becomes an opportunity cost to try to educate somebody that should have the education. And I'm not saying, obviously, this is every like, we have worked with so many phenomenal KOs over the last few years. The ones that stand out have just made life easier because they really get, this is the mission. Here's why we're here. We're here to help our warfighters be successful and to help the country, be safe. And when that's the driving mission, I really feel like things clear out of the way. And maybe there just needs to be more of that, of these contracting officers that don't get it, to sit down and understand people are going to die, or we're not going to help solve this one issue. Like, there are real complications that come into play if we're not helping collectively the government innovate. The hardest thing is, when you have like 4-star general or an SES being like, hey, we need to do this today, and it just gets lost in procurement. Like, it's hard to see those kind of capabilities lost when we all collectively know that things can turn around really fast.
So just to pull on that thread a little bit longer, and then I'll jump to another topic. One thing I've seen, particularly with the 8A program, again, the most famous and the most commonly utilized of set-asides, right? So I get that. There is specifically dedicated materials and people at SBA that if you have a contracts officer that doesn't know how to do it, you can get a govy that will give them a call and say, hey, here's how you do it, right? It's a dedicated thing. There is that also for SDVO set-asides, right? In various veteran offices at the VA and in other places. Would it help if there was some educational campaigns from the SBI or STTR offices that kind of just explained, so it's not like, hey, take my pamphlet that says Monkton on it, which, to your point, like, reasonably suspect, right? You're a contractor and you have a financial benefit. But if it was more just generally, hey, this is a course that can teach contracts officers how to do this, you're not going to fix a lazy contracts officer. Just like, contracts officers to me are a lot like umpires in a baseball game. They get a lot of crap for not doing their job, and when they do their job, they just kind of don't get noticed. So it's unfair. It's unfair, and I'm the first to admit that the duality.
I agree 100%.
But that said, like, there are places where when there's a difference in a call, and is that the rule or should that have been the rule? And I want to go to tape, if to use the umpire thing, like, would it be helpful if there was some investment on those offices in educating people on how to use this? Because so many SBIRs don't make it to phase 3, and that's on purpose. Or I think that's a good thing. I think that's the system working. Not every idea that gets a white paper deserves a $500 million IDIQ, period. But that's even more bolsters the ones that got one. We should be able to get that capability to the warfighter. So I just want to understand if that you think would be an outlet, or you think that the ones that get it, and the ones that don't, and it's probably not going to change the minds of the ones that don't.
So the hard part is a lot of that documentation exists. Like, if you go to the SBR website, like, it's there. If you go to Navy's SBIR, if you go to Air Force, like everyone has that information on there. And sometimes even when you provide that, it's not enough. We've talked to several SBIR offices, like they just don't have anybody to do that kind of outreach. We've talked to agencies, SBIR offices when we hit a roadblock, and we've had it where they've recommended us to the contracting officer we're talking about because they've done the most with SBIR, and it's like, well, we hit a roadblock with this person. So, it can be frustrating, but it's just continued. We try to educate, and again, if we hit that too big of a roadblock, it's like, hey, sorry guys, we can't do this year, and it's disappointing for everybody. But that's been hard lessons to learn. Of you're not going to win everything, you can't educate everyone. I saw on LinkedIn there was a post on DoD is rolling out software acquisition, like a software acquisition fire team or something like that, and my ask is just educate everybody on how to use the vehicles you already have. Like there's nothing out there that requires new people to be hired. This is simply an education problem and a willingness to act. I don't think we need to make more investment in more people. It's educating the people we do have on how to solve these issues rapidly.
No, fair enough. So in closing, just one kind of thought question for you. Obviously, you guys have gotten really far down, really great paths, really amazing stuff. If there was one thing you could have changed, either technology, process-wise, business-wise, over the last decade-long journey, what would that be, and how do you think you'd be different today for it?
I don't know. It's weird. I mean, you started your own company, and sometimes it's just the path you go leads you to where you need to be. Like I was really bitter, and I still have a lot of spite over our Air Force work ending in 2020. But looking back on it, that loss enabled us to rethink about the problem of how we solved it for one, but it allowed us to rethink about mobility, the intersection of cloud, and the products we're rolling out this year, which we sort of talked about, but are going to be coming out here mid-year. We wouldn't have built those without having gone through getting kicked pretty hard at certain times. Part of that is we've been victim to, and I know of other companies that the government tries to clone and take technology that exists that's commercially available. I think that's going to be a big problem for the DoD moving forward if they don't fix that problem immediately. Because in the end, we're all here for the same reason. Like we're all trying to help keep our country secure, make a little bit of money. Small businesses, you're not going to get rich, but you're going to do all right. But there are so many issues within the Department of Defense, Department of State. Every agency has a litany of problems that they need to get through. Why are you spending a minute reinventing the wheel of a commercial capability that can work in a regulated environment where we could be building glue to tie that into an existing system? Or the DoD has very domain specific problems that there's no commercial capability for. It's like, that's where these software development factories should be focusing on. What are the commercial things that aren't out there? How do we either work with a company to build them ourselves, or how do we take an 80% solution out there? It's been a hard lesson of not every customer out there is going to be looking out for collective best interests. So it's going to get to where you need to be eventually if it's going to work out. Has been, part of what we've been going on, and just reinvesting, learning more, sticking to a problem. And I think, again, going back to some of these software factories, I know you guys, we've been thinking about this problem singularly for over a decade. You guys have been thinking about your problems for years. And a lot of these, they can be govies, they can be contractors. They're in and out in 2 years at most. So they're not really focused on how do I solve this problem. And I have a completely unique perspective, I know you do, on how to solve these problems for their customers. I hope the government stops rejecting the subject matter expertise that desperately wants to help them be successful and start embracing it. I guess it is a plea to the government to start taking the subject matter expertise, but continue building and continue learning and building better things. Like not every loss, losses suck a lot, but not everyone is going to be the end. You just need to figure out, what's the, for us, it's been what's the next move? How can we do better next time? And how can we create a capability that no one else has? And for all those out there, that are worried, like, oh, the government's going to steal or somebody else might steal my technology. It's really hard to replicate existing stuff out there. The companies I've seen that we've partnered with and had this happen with, it's years of technology, subject matter expertise, and you're not going to replace it in 2 years hiring some contracting shop. It's a lot of hard work. Probably the end of what I would say is lessons learned and where we've been trying to go and are trying to go.
Awesome. Harold, thank you so much for being here. This is a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time. And for contracts officers listening, Phase 3 zippers are legal. And if you have edge compute requirements, you should be looking to the MATTER IDIQ. And again, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you all. I really appreciate it.